Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second event in our 2021 educational series, which we're calling Death Creations. And For those of you who don't know about us, our foundation's vision is to transform the end of life experience into the final act of living well. And one of the ways that we do that is through community education around end of life. But another big way we do that is through financial support for hospice patients and their families. So if you've donated to us through this series, or you're thinking about donating to us, I want you to know that that is really where your money goes. We're lucky enough to have this educational series underwritten by wonderful folks, such as tonight, Casa de la Luz Hospice and Palliative Care is supporting this event. So I want to take a minute to share a little story that 21 years ago, a woman named Lynette Jaramillo co-created this foundation as a way to support hospice patients and their families. She died unexpectedly 2 weeks ago to this night. And she was a larger than life figure and is greatly missed. And I just wanted to remember her. And as I mentioned, I maybe didn't mention, but she was also the co-owner of Casa de la Luz Hospice and Palliative Care, and chose to sponsor tonight's event, which is a beautiful love story and discussion, because family support meant so much to her. And so I want to thank our friends at Casa de la Luz Hospice and Palliative Care. I'm going to introduce David Fife, who is the hospice's social services director, and he will introduce the guest of our evening, Dr. Jessica Zitter.
We're just so grateful for Dr. Zitter to be here with us tonight, and to all of our attendees for taking part in this important conversation. As Megan said earlier, if you have questions for Dr. Zitter, please put them in the Q&A box that you find at the bottom of your screen. You just click on that box, type your questions in, and we will get to as many of them as possible once the film is over and time allows. So we want to welcome Dr. Zitter to this evening's event. She is a national advocate for transforming the way people die in America. She is a Harvard and UCSF trained physician to practice the unusual combination, and it is unusual combination, of critical care and palliative care medicine. She works as an attending physician at a public hospital in Oakland, California. Her work is featured in the Oscar and Emmy nominated Netflix documentary Extremis, and she's the author of Extreme Measures: Finding a Better Path to the End of Life. It is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to be able to both view Caregiver, a love story, and to have Dr. Zitter with us to discuss it. So, Doctor, before we view the film, would you take a moment to briefly describe the genesis and setting? And thank you so much.
Yeah, it is such a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm really honored. We are, just to give you a little bit of the origin story of this film, it was really not even necessarily meant to be a film. We were doing some filming of my friend Bambi, this very gracious woman who you're about to meet, who was spending the last 9 weeks of her life at home on hospice. And she was very welcoming and wanted to, she said, if this is going to help someone else have a good, peaceful death, I would like for you to film it. And we went into this film expecting it to be a celebration of life and dying at home. And you'll see that it's a little bit more complicated than that. And honestly, it was only a year after Bambi died when I was really kind of working with an editor who became my co-director, Kevin Gordon, to pull together the footage that we had collected and see if there was even a story there to tell, that I realized, oh my goodness, this film isn't about Bambi, it's about her husband, Rick. And I think you'll see as you go through the sort of surprise that I was handed by putting this footage together into a story. And I think it's actually a sort of a symbol of what actually happens to family caregivers in general, that we don't necessarily see. It's like a frog cooking in cold water, and then as it boils, you don't necessarily realize what's happening. until the product, until sometimes it's too late. And I think that this is a word of warning to all of us to understand this phenomenon of family caregiver burden earlier on, so that we can prepare for it and mitigate some of the suffering that family caregivers are experiencing in America. So with that, maybe we proceed to the film, and then we can have a hopefully robust Q&A afterwards.
I'm not going to say I'm not scared. Who doesn't want to just go to sleep and not wake up, you know? Hopefully it'll just be peaceful and quiet and not cause too much pain to the ones I love.
We're just kind of thrust into the role sometimes, and you have to step up.
I knew the cancer was starting to take over. We weren't engaged yet, and I told him, this is your get out of jail free card. Next weekend he came out, pulled out a box. I didn't even open up the box. Just fell into his arms and said yes.
It was a pretty big decision because I basically had to leave work. How are you feeling? Are you comfortable? You're not in pain. I'm not trained for this, but this is the best thing for her.
How are you?
I'm hanging in there. It's a little tough, but I'm doing the best I can.
I'm hoping they're going to do is raise the methadone dose a little.
The decline has been more difficult than I expected.
What happened?
And I feel like my health is deteriorating with hers. This is a journey for the end of her life, and I want to give her the best care I can give her. It's all about love.
Zitter, thank you so much to you and to Kevin Gordon and to your whole crew for allowing us to become aware of this powerful story and the important message behind it, and to raise the questions. When we begin now, maybe we can begin by asking how you are doing and how you are doing with your practice these days in the middle of the pandemic, and just to check in.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking. It's been a rough year. I, have been working in the ICU and palliative care, not as much as many of my friends. I work more part-time than they do, but the suffering has been profound, as you can all imagine. I'm sure you're seeing it in your hospice practice as well. And I think we've just gone through something very, very important for us as a healthcare community. I think in terms of really seeing up close and personal in a way that's really, really hard to ignore, with even all of our protocols and practices that we can hide behind in some ways, and we often do, the suffering of serious illness and end of life situations, the loneliness of it, whether, again, all of this with or without a pandemic. These are all things that are here anyways. The pandemic has laid them more bare, put a magnifying glass on them. I think family caregiver burden is one of those issues as well. I mean, I'm a in-hospital based physician, so family caregiver burden was just not something that I ever saw. And it really took going home and following my friends home to learn about it. And so I think that this pandemic, as awful as it has been, has provided some opportunities for us to raise our awareness about a variety of things. And I hope that we all take this opportunity to listen to the messaging and the experiences that we've just been unable to turn our faces away from.
Absolutely. One of the questions that came in was someone who does work on a hospice team and was so moved by the film and wants to make sure that team members are able to see it as well. Are there going to be opportunities for us to share this in other venues?
Absolutely. And our goal is to make this increasingly available. I mean, ultimately, the goal is to have it completely available, widely available. There's a whole film sort of sequence about how you unroll a film to get maximally impact, to maximize its impact. And so what we're doing right now, we're at the phase where we're doing essentially private screenings for places. People can join. We've got a lot of institutions that have reached out to us to do screenings. They're all listed on my website on the screenings page, and a lot of them are public. We're always happy to do events at other places that request us, and we've got lots that people can reach out to me on reach out to us on the email that's on the website, caregiveraLoveStory.com, to find all that information.
Great, thank you. The film vividly shows the oftentimes great burden that's placed on unpaid caregivers, family caregivers. The experience, as Rick talked about, the financial stress, having to leave his job, sleep deprivation. Caregivers neglect their own health issues, put those who they're caring for in front of themselves. Can you talk a little bit from your own knowledge about what hospice does provide to support caregivers through their interdisciplinary team approach, and then other things that you have learned through your own practice that can be of support to caregivers in addition?
First of all, the most important thing for me in making this film was to celebrate hospice. That was why we made the film in the first place, because hospice is the best that we have. A wonderful approach. Bambi would never have been able to be home without hospice those last 9 weeks. And that was what she wanted. And that was what Rick wanted. And, the issue is that there's a lot of lack of clarity and mythologizing about what hospice is, because more and more people want hospice. More and more people are choosing hospice. And I think that clarifying what hospice does do and focus on what their purview is and what it isn't is really important. Public service message, because I think if people are expecting something that's unrealistic, then they're going to get disappointed, and there may be distrust, and so we have to clarify what hospice does do. And there's variability. And as a hospice, some hospices have more volunteers than per patient, and some have less. There's a lot of variability. Most hospices have some volunteer hours. I was just some of those volunteer hours can go towards stuffing envelopes in the office, quite honestly, and some of them can go towards helping people with grocery shopping and possibly even a little bit of respite care, et cetera. It really does vary from hospice to hospice, and I would say it's an important thing to ask about as you're choosing a hospice. I think hospice doesn't, hospice, what does hospice get paid for an in-home typical day? It's $150 to $200. And that is really quickly taken up by managing the durable medical equipment, managing the medications, teaching and supporting the family to manage symptoms. I mean, that's not a lot of money for doing those essential things. So when you hear me in the beginning of it saying, oh yeah, it's not your job to change her diaper. Well, whose job is it? It's not really hospice's job either. Maybe you'll get a little bit of help, but it's not going to be a sustainable amount of help when you have to be doing laundry over and over and over again. So I think it's extremely important that people are prepared, caregivers are prepared for the reality, not the myth of what hospice is, but the reality of what they're going to be having to do when they go home. And I think that way, people, it's like any kind of advanced care planning. It's the same as advanced care planning around, do you or do you not want to use that ventilator one day? Do you want to be at home? Do you want to be at the hospital? This is another type of advanced care planning. If you know that you want to come home, if you know that you're going to want to be at home on hospice, do some advanced care planning in your family about how it's going to go. What is the homegrown help? I like to talk about homegrown help. Like, who are the siblings, the friends, the neighbors, the community, the religious, the church group, et cetera, that's going to have your back. Rick had a very supportive community, you could see. And I was part of that community. But we were doing things that communities kind of think we're supposed to do. Bring over another casserole. The truth is, what would have been more helpful to Rick would have been to bring over food that was probably more palatable to a young 3-year-old, to help clean out the fridge so that you could put the food in instead of having it just sit on the counter, to do a couple loads of laundry, etc. And just with a little bit of those types of tasks done, Rick would have just had some more time to rest and rejuvenate. And I think it could have made a big difference for him.
Absolutely. And the CDC earlier this year put out statistics talking about the burden that family caregivers, unpaid caregivers, bear in our country, and especially during the pandemic, as you raised earlier. And they talked about what a large percentage of these unpaid caregivers have had serious thoughts of suicide over this past year, just because so much of the stress has mounted. So it's especially acute right now during the pandemic, when we're all going through that time of isolation, and you just think about how maybe there would be that homegrown support, but that's been limited as people have not been able to go and visit and provide that hands-on support, family members or friends. So one of the questions that was raised was, what is your vision for improving the caregiver situation in this country? Or, as they go on to say, is the end of life journey a burden that just must be borne, basically?
Well, I hope that one day you will all have a chance to hear my keynote talk, which I just practiced for the second time with a group of people today, that goes with the film. And it really does lay out a plan. It really talks, I talk about what are the systems that touch a caregiver's life. Well, one is social services, agencies, and legislation around in your local, state, and federal lives of a caregiver. What kinds of resources are out there? What kinds of social support services are out there? How much money is being put towards it? How much money is being put towards helping caregivers navigate all of those resources? By the way, do you know that only 4% of those resources are actually used? Or only, I'm sorry, this is a piece of information I just learned yesterday. It's only 4% of caregivers are utilizing resources. It's tiny. So we've got to not only have resources available, put money towards supporting caregivers in community, but we also have to direct them and support them. These people are overwhelmed. So to expect a caregiver to figure it out themselves is crazy. It's a complicated landscape. We need to have navigators for these caregivers. So in that sort of realm of social services, again, local and federal, state, we've got to have more support to get the caregivers the support that they need. We have to have more resources out there. There's tons of resources out there already, but really make them usable and navigable. The other, 60% of caregivers work. So employers are a really important part of the puzzle here. So I think employers really need to get into the game here and understand not only are their caregivers suffering, but you know what? They're suffering too as a result of not supporting caregivers adequately. And they're losing $65 billion a year, employers. And they're starting to pay attention to that, by the way. In caregiver loss of work, quitting work, and changing jobs because of lack of flexibility. So I think employers really need to step in. There's lots of things that some of the early employers are starting to do in terms of increasing benefits to caregivers to provide extra flexibility and extra resources to them and support and benefits to them. So that's a really important piece of it. Healthcare, all of us, hospitals, clinics, hospices. What do we need to do a better job of? We need to be identifying and paying attention to these caregivers more than we do. We in the hospitals, I'm going to speak. Here I am. I'm a palliative care doctor. And I didn't know about this in its depth until I made this movie. I think we are so focused on the patient. We're so focused on being patient-centered. And we're so hospital-centered. Those of us who work in hospitals, we don't think about that more holistic piece about the community, what's happening when they discharge. We notice that people bounce back into the emergency room and we think, well, maybe, that family was just having issues. This is a phenomenon of this is really happening. People are bouncing back into the hospitals all the time because their caregivers were not adequately supported and inadequately prepared for what they were going to be dealing with emotionally and psychologically. And what happens when someone bounces back into the hospital? Well, what happens is they go right back into the hospital system, what I call the end-of-life conveyor belt, bouncing off and into the intensive care unit, sometimes going back onto a ventilator because they're very sick at this point, as you can imagine. Their family members don't really trust. They don't trust the hospice necessarily. They don't trust being outside of the hospital. They're like, we are just going back to the hospital. Don't even think of sending us out anymore. This happens to us all the time. And we're not connecting the dots. So we in the hospital need to do a much better job of identifying caregivers. And that doesn't mean saying, are you a caregiver or do you have a caregiver? People don't always use that word. Asking things like, who helps you with your medications? Who's going to drive you to that radiation therapy appointment? And then identifying who that caregiver is and really sitting down with them, whether it's the social worker or even somebody who's hired by that hospital to be special caregiver liaison. And then identifying them, preparing them for the reality instead of this sort of myth that we send people out. Oh, it's going to be great with hospice. Everything's going to be fine. You're not going to have to change any diapers. And then we need to connect them. We have to have a bridge to what's going on in the community, a pipeline right from the hospital, because again, the hospital is a great place to find caregivers. Where there's a patient, there's probably a caregiver. That we've got to knit together with those people out there in the community, those social services agencies and all those resources I was talking about. And we need to have some kind of a connection there. And then the last sort of system that I think about is us, the communities, the friends, the neighbors, et cetera. We really need to start asking and organizing ourselves about, identifying who's a caregiver, just like in the hospital that I mentioned, and then figuring out what we can do in our homegrown way to support them in some way, even to give them an extra 15 minutes just to decompress. And I think all of those things coming together is going to knit together a little bit more of a safety net for the family caregiver.
Thank you. And someone else raised the same issue that you had talked about, is that sometimes people don't want to be identified as a caregiver. So using other terminology about what you're doing and ways that you're helping might invite that dialogue a little bit more about what support might be needed. And I agree that such an important member of the team, whether it's in the hospital setting or in the hospice setting, is that social worker who knows how to navigate the bureaucracies of whether it's the social service agencies or the state level support, to be able to connect and figure out how people can get added support in the home on a day-to-day basis for it. And a lot of it has to do with I'm so glad we're having this conversation. We need to have more of these conversations because there's a level of shame, I think, that goes with this, that people are ashamed of needing help or of the level of care that they're at or needing to be able to provide. And so it's how to get caregivers, those who are providing that care, to accept the help and to be able to talk openly and to be vulnerable about the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, people say, whoops, am I there? I'm not muted. People say, I'm not a caregiver, I'm his wife, and part of what I talk about in my presentation is we think it's going to be like Love Story. How many of us remember that movie Love Story from 1970? Most romantic movie around. That's what a caregiver is, sitting by the bed, until she draws her final breath. I mean, that's just not a realistic sense of what caregiving is. It's so off the mark. It's so Hollywood. What's happening really in the caregivers' homes is a tremendously different experience. And I think caregivers are sort of still feeling like they should be that, that husband who sits there or the wife who sits there and never complains and just does it and sucks it up because this is what you do when you love somebody. And the reality is it's not sustainable. And you heard, here's Rick, this newlywed who's in love with this woman, who's this incredible person who you can imagine how, this just beautiful relationship. And he says, this isn't what I signed up for. And he knew she was actively dying. It wasn't like she was going to be around forever, but he was absolutely coming to the end of his limit, of his abilities. And, he only did that for 9 weeks. The average caregiver does this for 4.5 years. And so we have to put that in context. Rick almost didn't make it. I don't know what it would have been like if he'd had to go another 3 weeks. I was watching him from the sidelines and it was not pretty.
Yeah, it seemed pretty evident from the film that if they didn't utilize the respite benefit in hospice, where Bambi could go into a skilled nursing facility for 5 days and give him a break, you're right. He may not have made it and been able to keep doing that. So it is so important, whether it's utilizing that benefit or otherwise getting the homegrown support that you talked about and getting that in there. It's vital for caregivers. Someone was asking if you had any information about how the burden on unpaid caregivers varies by race or ethnicity,
Mm.
whether that's in different cultures and expectations about fulfilling the caregiver role or access to resources, anything in terms of that you might be able to bring to the conversation.
It's a critically important issue. The disparities, the inequities, the suffering is so much greater among our more vulnerable communities, minorities, women, low income families, significantly worse. And like with everything everything that crumbles in our social fabric, everything that isn't quite as safety netted as you would want it to be, the people who are the canaries in the coal mine are always the people who are all living more at the margins and more in a vulnerable situation. And we're seeing that with caregiver burden in general and significantly exacerbated with the pandemic. For example, African Americans are 4 times as likely to spend the majority of their savings on caregiving. I mean, minorities in general are significantly more likely to be doing caregiving while they're also enrolled in school, and they're much more likely to be taking care of more than one person at a time. Women in general are leaving the workforce during the pandemic for caregiver related responsibilities at a rate of 4 to 1 over men. And there's a concern that this pandemic from a caregiving perspective will have set women back a decade professionally. I mean, I could go on, but this is a very real phenomenon, and we're seeing terrible, terrible suffering in communities of color and lower socioeconomic status that we just have to address as a civilized society.
Thank you so much. And also, from your own perspective, from your own practice and your experience, how much of these challenges are also due to the fear of death as a society, our inability to talk about our own mortality and to prepare for it?
That's a great question because, it's first of all, I don't know if people have seen the film Extremis, which is also another film that we did in the intensive care unit about decision making around end of life stuff. And if there's a message from that film, it's go and think about advanced care planning. But again, I think if there's a message from caregiver, it's the same exact message. Plan, talk, communicate, be realistic, and it will go better. And the only way to do all of that stuff is to be having ongoing dialogues, because we're living in a society where we can really ignore death, and we do. I mean, we watch TV, CNN, and every other commercial is about some miracle drug or some miracle hospital that's going to cure your cancer no matter what. And I think it's easy to get distracted from the work of preparing, and we've got a lot of preparing to do around death. Otherwise, and if we do that preparation, things go so much better. So now that I'm aware of family caregiver burden, I am becoming an advocate, just like I was an advocate about talking about breathing machines. I'm now an advocate about talking about preparing your family. Now, here's an irony that I'm not proud of. I still haven't talked to my parents. Now that I'm aware of this, I've been starting to talk to my husband and my sister. Well, but I haven't talked to my parents about caregiver burden. I haven't talked to my parents about, Mom and Dad, when you're no longer able to take care of yourself, let's talk about a family plan that's going to work for everybody, because that just feels really difficult, but it's important, and I'm going to do it. Once I figure out how to do it with my own parents, I'm going to try to help everybody else figure out how to do it with theirs.
That's great. That's great. It's interesting too, when even in our own hospice, when we ask folks to raise their hand at all staff meetings for those who have filled out their advance directives, it's amazing. Then when you see how many people have not done that, and we live and breathe it every single day. So it's something that we all need to work on in society. But I'm wondering, if have you seen any benefit to providers, to doctors being able to have these conversations, since Medicare has been reimbursing for that conversation of what kind of care do you want as you're facing end of life? Do you see a change in that?
You mean for paying for the $78 for a half an hour of a conversation about end of life goals of care?
I believe, yes, that's what I'm referring to.
The answer, if you could tell from my sarcastic response, so I apologize, is probably not. I don't know if there's data on this. I don't know the actual data, but I don't think that it's changed a whit. I'll tell you why. Because although I do believe that remunerating physicians or compensating physicians to have these important conversations is a very, very important first step, I think there are many bigger obstacles. Not that that's not an obstacle, because when you talk about conversations and communications, say, oh, that's just sort of fluff, and then of course nobody does it. No one feels obligated to do it. When you start to pay for it, people start to become more serious about it and see it as a more serious intervention. However, I think the problem with us not doing a good enough job as doctors in having conversations and communicating with people is probably less about money than it is about avoidance, fear, discomfort, not wanting to open up a Pandora's box, not having the skills, the communication skills. Those are really hard. I had to work for many, many years as a palliative care doctor, focusing very intently on my communication skills to learn how to do this. It's not easy stuff. It's just as hard, I'll tell you right now, as managing a ventilator. I think it's a lot harder. So let me clarify that. So I think we've got a long way to go. That includes changing payment structures for sure. So that was a good step. But it also includes changing the culture of medicine in some fundamental ways that I could talk on and on about for a long time.
Well, we'll have you back and talk more about that. But I would like to shift gears a little bit right now, because another aspect that the film raised that I think is so important is the grief that the caregivers, family caregivers, face for years to come after the death of their loved one. And I would like for you to lift up a little bit more about the support that's important for that. It may be, for instance, hospice does provide bereavement support to survivors, but it also is just important to raise up the idea that this is a long-term journey that
Yes.
our caregivers are on.
And I'll tell you again, this is something I learned through Rick, just watching Rick and seeing Rick. And it's taken him, you hear him in the film. He says, it's taken me, I couldn't work for a long time. And he was so filled with grief and trauma because, having a front row seat, even with the support of a wonderful hospice, which he had, but having a front row seat to your wife dying, getting short of breath, defecating, needing her diaper changed. I mean, this is traumatic stuff. This is identity changing stuff. And we have to, in addition to understanding the importance of caregivers needing physical support, we've got to pay attention to the emotional, psychological experience that they have gone through and understand that that is a form of trauma that requires a lot of support and a lot of healing and a lot of grief groups. He has had a lot of follow-up from the hospice that supported him and has really found that helpful. And it's been a long process for him to get over this experience. And I think we need to understand there's so many, 1 in 5 Americans, 1 in 5 is a family caregiver. Imagine how much collective grief we have around us all the time.
Absolutely. And we could talk all night, I think, if we had the time for it. We're kind of coming to the hour. But I see gratitude in the attendees today for your optimism and for your passion and for your desire to move the needle on this conversation and to invite more voices into it and make room for those voices, and so that we can learn from one another and improve how we support one another through this important time. So thank you so much. I'm going to bring it back over to Julie now and invite her to come back on.
Hi there. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I just want to say how grateful to Rick and Bambi and to you. I mean, you're a friend of theirs, and just found the importance of this topic, and that they allowed you, and that you allowed, you know, the creation of this beautiful, and it really is a love story. I love the name's perfect. So thank you for just offering a window onto the challenges faced by, you know, if it's like, if you haven't been a caregiver, you will be. And if you've never been cared for, you will be at some point, right? So thank you so much for being with us. I want to thank Casa de la Luz Hospice and Palliative Care for making tonight's event possible, and for all of you joining us, sharing your questions, sharing your insights. I wish we had more time. But you know, we can, this is an ongoing series, so maybe we can come back to this particular topic and share more time together around it. I do want to just mention that coming up in March, we're shifting gears a bit. We're going with a game night, which is going to be highly interactive. We're using, it's called the Death Deck. And so we'd love for you to join us for that. And then in April, we're going to have a presentation around non-pharmacological interventions for agitation in loved ones with dementia. Very powerful. I've heard these two women speak, and just some really sort of groundbreaking information. So I wish you health and happiness, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.